The freezing steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, but the real chill didn't come from the blaring sirens. It came from the cruel smirk on my husband's face while his sister live-streamed my arrest to hundreds of thousands of viewers. They thought this perfect setup would bury me in disgrace forever. They had no idea that when the precinct doors closed, my trap was triggered. Stick around, because I promise you, revenge has never been this sweet. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without a budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1, so our dedicated team can pay their living expenses and continue bringing you these thrilling tales. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description or pinned comment. My name is Adriana Oliver, and I am 32 years old. I was the lead engineer at a massive technology conglomerate, but on this particular night, my impressive title meant absolutely nothing. The nightmare began at exactly 2:15 in the morning in the heart of our incredibly expensive suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas. I was standing alone in the dark living room when the deafening sound of shattering glass tore through the absolute silence of the night. The heavy mahogany front door was kicked open with explosive, terrifying force. Blinding white tactical beams sliced through the darkness, darting frantically across the walls, followed instantly by the heavy thudding boots of a local tactical police unit. They swarmed the room like a pack of starving wolves, shouting overlapping commands that blurred into a chaotic wall of noise. Get on the ground. Show me your hands. Do it right now. Before my eyes could even adjust to the blinding light, rough hands grabbed my shoulders and violently slammed my body down onto the cold hardwood floor. The impact knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. A heavy knee drove sharply into my spine, pinning me down as my arms were twisted painfully behind my back. The freezing steel of the handcuffs bit brutally into my wrists, clicking tighter and cutting off my circulation with every micro-movement I made. As I gasped for air, the commanding officer leaned down, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. He barked out that I was being placed under an emergency arrest. The charges were staggering. I was being accused of stealing highly classified corporate trade secrets and embezzling tens of millions of dollars from the very technology conglomerate I had practically built from the ground up. They yanked me to my feet, giving me zero time to process the absurd accusations. The officers dragged me roughly through the debris of my destroyed front entrance and out into the suffocating humidity of the Texas night. Red and blue lights flashed wildly, painting the massive oak trees in eerie, shifting colors. But as they marched me toward the waiting patrol car, my eyes locked onto a sight that made the violent tactical raid feel like absolute child's play. Standing casually on the illuminated grand porch of our mansion was my husband, Marcus. He was draped in his silk designer robe, looking as if he had just stepped out of a luxury lifestyle commercial. In his right hand, he effortlessly balanced a crystal glass filled with expensive red wine. He did not look shocked. He did not look worried. Instead, as he took a slow, deliberate sip, a sickeningly smug smile spread across his handsome face. His eyes locked onto mine, gleaming with an absolute, unadulterated glee. It was the exact look of a hunter watching his prey finally bleed out in the dirt. Right beside him stood his younger sister, Valerie. She was practically vibrating with excitement, holding her smartphone up with both hands. The camera lens pointed directly at my humiliated, handcuffed state. I knew exactly what she was doing. Valerie lived for internet clout, and right now, she was live streaming my emergency arrest to hundreds of thousands of her devoted followers. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her face was twisted into an exaggerated mask of betrayal and sorrow. "I cannot believe she did this to us," Valerie wailed into the microphone, forcing her voice to crack perfectly for the audience. "My family trusted her. We gave her everything, and she is nothing but a cold-blooded fraud. She completely destroyed our family company. She stole tens of millions of dollars from us." Marcus and Valerie were waiting for the breakdown. They wanted the grand finale for their viral broadcast. They fully expected me to drop to my knees in the driveway, to cry hysterically, to scream at the police that I was innocent, and to beg Marcus to save me. They wanted my utter destruction broadcasted in ultra-high definition to ruin my reputation and my spirit beyond any hope of repair. I did not give them a single drop of satisfaction. Instead of panicking or pleading, I let a terrifying stillness wash over my entire body. I squared my shoulders, completely ignoring the throbbing pain in my wrists. I kept my face entirely stone cold, devoid of even a fraction of a hint of fear or sorrow. As the officers pushed my head down to guide me into the back of the cramped police cruiser, I stopped for just a split second. I turned my head and stared directly into the glowing lens of Valerie's phone camera. I did not blink. My gaze was razor sharp, slicing right through the digital connection to everyone watching, but mostly piercing straight into the rotten souls of the two people standing on the porch. The young police officer holding my arm shivered visibly. I could feel his tight grip loosen just a fraction. My eerie, unnatural silence completely creeped him out. He probably thought I was in severe shock or just a genuine, remorseless sociopath. But that young cop had absolutely no idea what was actually running through my mind in the back of that cruiser. I was not silent because I was afraid. And I was definitely not silent because I was defeated. I was silent because my brain was already executing a highly complex equation. I was simply counting down the minutes, waiting patiently for my own devastating trap to snap shut on the very people who thought they had just buried me. As the patrol car tore through the empty avenues, the harsh glare of the streetlights flickering across my face, the chaos of the arrest faded into the background. The wailing siren became a dull hum. To understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal I had just witnessed on that porch, you have to look past the silk robes and the crystal wine glasses. You have to peel back the glittering, flawless veneer of the American elite and stare directly into the rotting core underneath. My journey into their world did not start in handcuffs. It began completely differently. Before I was the disgraced wife, I was a prodigy. I was a highly sought-after systems architect, building unbreakable digital infrastructures for top-tier financial institutions. That was when Marcus and his father, Richard, found me. They laid out the red carpet, recruiting me to become the chief technology officer for Orogenics Innovations, a boutique biological research firm Richard had founded. Back then, I was blinded by the intoxicating illusion of Marcus's love. He was charming, attentive, and painted a picture of a partnership where we would change the world together. I believed him implicitly. When I joined, Orogenics was secretly teetering on the very edge of absolute bankruptcy. I poured every ounce of my intellect, my youth, and my relentless ambition into that company. I worked 18-hour days, completely restructuring their data analytics and patent protection networks. Because of my proprietary algorithms, we secured massive government grants and private funding. I single-handedly dragged Orogenics from the brink of total collapse and transformed it into a market unicorn, achieving a valuation of over $1 billion. I gave them a kingdom. But exactly 1 year ago, the magnificent castle I built crumbled into dust in the span of a single night. I was running a routine, high-level diagnostic on our core servers to patch a minor security vulnerability. It was tedious work, the kind of digital housekeeping I usually delegated, but something about a specific cluster of encrypted offshore transactions caught my eye. They were cleverly disguised as overseas research and development expenditures. I followed the digital breadcrumbs, bypassing my own security firewalls, slipping deeper into the system's architecture than I had ever gone before. What I found at the bottom of that digital abyss completely shattered my reality. Orogenics Innovations was not a beacon of medical advancement. The biological research was nothing but a highly sophisticated, shiny front. The company was actually a massive, elaborate money laundering machine. I uncovered hidden ledgers detailing hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through our accounts, effectively washing blood money for international cartels specializing in illicit arms smuggling. Every single one of these phantom transactions was meticulously authorized by Richard and executed by Marcus. The chilling realization washed over me like ice water. My husband did not love me. His father did not respect my genius. They had actively hunted me down and married me into their family for one specific purpose. They needed a brilliant, naive architect to build a fortress around their criminal enterprise. Worse, they needed a perfect scapegoat. Because I was the chief technology officer, my digital signature was stamped on every layer of the network. If the federal authorities ever breached our walls, all the forensic evidence would point directly to the rogue, ambitious genius at the top of the technology department. They had designed my throne to be an electric chair. Most people would have panicked. They would have confronted their husband, screamed, cried, or immediately run to the authorities. But my mind is built on logic, not emotion. If I exposed them right then, with their immense wealth and deep political connections, they would simply crush me like an insect. I would be silenced or framed before I could even reach a courtroom. So, I swallowed my devastation. I smiled at my husband over morning coffee, and I quietly went to work. I became a ghost in my own machine, meticulously gathering, copying, and encrypting every scrap of evidence. However, keeping up a charade with sociopaths is a dangerous game. My behavioral shifts, though microscopic, did not go unnoticed. The friction started a few months ago when Richard slid a stack of fabricated quarterly financial reports across my desk. I politely but firmly refused to sign them, citing compliance issues. Marcus cornered me in my office later that afternoon. His eyes were cold, stripped of all the manufactured warmth he usually displayed. "You need to sign the documents. Adriana, it is standard operating procedure. Do not complicate things." I held my ground, and in that brief exchange, I saw the exact moment the dynamic shifted. Marcus and Richard realized their perfect, obedient scapegoat was suddenly growing a spine. They knew I was becoming a liability. In their ruthless world, liabilities are not managed, they are eliminated. They decided I had to be completely neutralized before their empire was jeopardized. To lay the groundwork for my destruction, they unleashed Valerie. My sister-in-law was not just an attention-starved social media addict. She was a highly effective psychological weapon. Under Richard's direction, Valerie orchestrated a vicious, stealthy smear campaign against me within the corporate hierarchy. She started planting toxic rumors among the board of directors, whispering that the pressure was making me erratic, that I was locking them out of their own systems, and that I was silently plotting a corporate coup. Simultaneously, she dropped anonymous blind items on corporate gossip blogs, painting a picture of an unhinged, greedy executive. They were carefully isolating me, cutting off my allies, and meticulously preparing the public narrative for a massive, scandalous shock. They thought they were masterfully setting the stage for my spectacular downfall, but as I sat in the back of the police car, listening to the static of the police radio, I knew they had made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that the architect who builds the system always knows how to tear it down. To execute my downfall, my husband and father-in-law spared absolutely no expense. They reached deep into the criminal underworld, hiring the most ruthless and expensive black market hackers money could buy. I watched their digital footprints creeping through the outer layers of my network days before the actual raid. Their objective was brilliant in its pure malice. They engineered a mountain of highly sophisticated, fabricated evidence. They painstakingly spoofed my personal internet protocol address, attaching it to dozens of illegal wire transfers routing tens of millions of dollars into obscure offshore accounts. But they did not stop at financial sabotage. They meticulously forged hundreds of internal emails and encrypted text messages. These faked communications painted a damning, intricate picture of me acting as a rogue operative, actively negotiating to sell the proprietary core technology of Orogenics Innovations to hostile foreign competitors. It was a flawless digital frame-up designed to guarantee me a federal prison sentence of at least 40 years. They knew perfectly well that if I had even a single day to prepare a legal defense, I would tear their fabricated evidence to shreds in a courtroom. So, They eliminated the possibility of a fair fight, utilizing their vast wealth and shadowy political connections. Richard and Marcus applied immense pressure directly on the local district attorney. They dumped substantial, untraceable donations into campaign funds, effectively forcing the prosecutor to issue an emergency nighttime arrest warrant. There was zero preliminary investigation, no questions asked, just a tactical strike squad sent to my house in the dead of the night to drag me away before I could access a computer or contact a lawyer. Simultaneously, Valerie launched the public execution. Just 3 hours before the police kicked down my door, she uploaded a masterfully edited, highly dramatized video across all major social media platforms. Through convincing, fake tears, she fed the internet a massive, coordinated lie. She claimed to have discovered that I was rapidly liquidating the company assets and booking private, untraceable flights to flee the United States by dawn. The algorithm caught the manufactured drama instantly. Within minutes, the video went viral, sparking massive outrage among retail investors, corporate shareholders, and the general public. The mob was out for my blood, demanding my immediate imprisonment before I was even put in handcuffs. What Marcus, Richard, and their expensive mercenaries never comprehended was that I built the very architecture they were trying to manipulate. The moment their hackers breached my external firewalls to plant the fake evidence, my private, hidden security alarms went off. A normal corporate executive would have panicked. A standard security protocol would have immediately locked down the servers, blocked the foreign addresses, and initiated a total system wipe to protect the network. I did none of those things. I sat in the darkness of my home office, staring at the glowing monitors, and I smiled. Instead of blocking their aggressive attack, I quietly unlatched the digital gates. I deliberately opened a hidden back door right into my own personal, highly restricted terminal. I invited the wolves inside. I watched in real time as they confidently dumped terabytes of fabricated wire transfers and forged espionage emails directly onto my hard drive, completely convinced they were remaining undetected. They thought they were planting a bomb to destroy my life. They had absolutely no idea they were actually swallowing a lethal poison. Weeks before their attack, anticipating their exact move, I had written a highly specialized piece of tracking malware. I disguised it perfectly as a standard, deeply embedded system registry file. The exact second their hackers dropped the fake documents into my computer, my malware instantly and silently attached itself to their payload. It hitched a ride right back through the secure, encrypted tunnels they had built for the hack. It bypassed all of Richard's expensive military-grade encryption and burrowed straight into the absolute center of their hidden, offline servers. My silent virus did not destroy anything. It simply mirrored their entire massive system. Every single real black ledger, every hidden offshore account holding cartel blood money, every illegal arms smuggling manifest spanning the last 5 years, my malware quietly copied it all. It then compressed the massive data files and beamed them directly to a secure, decentralized cloud server I had set up under a completely untraceable ghost identity. They thought they were sealing my coffin by framing me with fake corporate crimes. In reality, Marcus and Richard had just handed me the master keys to their genuine, sprawling criminal empire. They had painstakingly built the trap, and I had merely allowed them to walk in and lock themselves safely inside. The heavy steel door of the interrogation room slammed shut, sealing me inside a windowless, claustrophobic concrete box. The air in the Austin police precinct was thick and oppressive, carrying the sour, lingering stench of stale, burned coffee and decades of cheap tobacco sweat. They had shackled my wrists to a heavy, frozen aluminum table bolted directly to the center of the floor. The sharp, metallic cold bit into my skin, anchoring me in the stark, unforgiving glare of a single, buzzing fluorescent tube overhead. Every second dragged, amplified by the rhythmic, agonizing drip of a leaky pipe somewhere deep within the precinct walls. It was an environment designed specifically to crush the human spirit, to make a person feel small, isolated, and utterly hopeless. The heavy lock clicked, and 2 seasoned investigators swaggered into the room. Their faces were flushed with the arrogant, triumphant glow of men who believed they had just bagged the ultimate trophy. The lead detective, a bulky man with a permanent scowl, violently slammed a massive, thick manila folder down onto the metal table. The sharp crack echoed off the concrete walls like a gunshot. He leaned over, planting his large hands flat on the aluminum surface, invading my personal space until I could smell the peppermint gum completely failing to mask his foul breath. He confidently informed me that the sheer volume of the fraud and espionage charges meant I was absolutely guaranteed to rot in a maximum security federal penitentiary for the rest of my natural life. Before I could even register his threat, my gaze drifted to the narrow, reinforced glass window of the interrogation room door. Out in the chaotic bullpen of the precinct, a television was mounted high on the wall, broadcasting a local news channel. Even without the volume, I recognized the scene instantly. It was Valerie. She was no longer just live streaming from her phone. She had managed to secure a live, primetime television interview. I watched her perfectly manicured hands wipe away non-existent tears. The glowing chyron crawling across the bottom of the screen read that the sister-in-law of the disgraced technology executive was speaking out. I could easily read her dramatic lips as she continued to weave elaborate, malicious lies about my insatiable greed and my supposed total betrayal of their loving, generous family. She was milking every single second of the spotlight, cementing my public execution. Back inside the stifling room, the second detective, a younger, eager man, pulled a crisp, printed document from the top of the file. He tossed a cheap ballpoint pen onto the table, letting it roll until it tapped against my chained wrists. He adopted a sickeningly patronizing tone, urging me to do the smart thing and sign the full confession right now. If I fully cooperated, he promised, they would speak to the district attorney about a slightly more lenient sentence. To break my resolve, they began loudly reading out the specific details of the evidence. They recited the exact times, dates, and enormous financial figures of the fabricated offshore wire transfers that Marcus had so eagerly provided to them. They gloated over the fake, heavily encrypted emails, utterly convinced they were holding a royal flush. They waited for the breakdown. They waited for the tears, the desperate denial, the panicked bargaining that they saw from every other broken suspect who sat in that exact chair. Instead, I simply leaned back against the hard wooden chair, the chains rattling softly in the dead silence. I completely ignored the pen. I looked directly into the lead detective's eyes, my expression a mask of absolute chilling indifference. I am not going to sign a single page of your fabricated fairy tale, I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of any tremor. But I will ask for one single, simple favor. If you grant it, you can ask me anything you want. The lead detective scoffed loudly, crossing his thick arms over his chest. He sarcastically asked what exactly a ruined corporate criminal thought she was in a position to demand. Inside the inner left pocket of my black suit jacket, the one your officers confiscated and threw into an evidence bag, there is a small, laminated white card, I instructed calmly, speaking slowly and deliberately as if addressing a confused child. Printed on that card is a sequence of 12 random alphanumeric characters. I want your partner to walk out to his terminal, log into the National Crime Information Center database, and type that exact 12-character string into the primary federal search bar. The younger investigator let out a sharp, mocking laugh, looking at his partner as if I had completely lost my mind under the psychological pressure. He mockingly asked if I thought a magic password was going to make the massive fraud charges magically disappear. He leaned in, ready to unleash another wave of intimidation. But I did not break eye contact. I did not blink. I projected an aura of absolute terrifying authority that completely mismatched my handcuffed, vulnerable state. I stared straight through his arrogant facade, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the room stretch out until it became physically uncomfortable for him. "Type it in," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, commanding whisper. "Unless, of course, you want to be the one completely responsible for what happens when you fail to do so." The young detective's mocking smile slowly faltered. A flicker of genuine hesitation crossed his face. My unnatural calm was deeply unsettling. Shrugging with a forced, dismissive attitude to save face, he muttered that he would play along with my little psychotic game just to prove how doomed I was. He grabbed his notebook, turned on his heel, and walked out the heavy metal door, leaving me alone with the lead detective and the ticking clock, waiting for the devastating storm to finally make landfall. The lead detective leaned heavily against the cold concrete wall, chewing his peppermint gum with a slow, arrogant rhythm. He crossed his arms and stared down at me, completely convinced that my request was nothing more than the desperate, pathetic stall tactic of a broken woman. He confidently assured me that his partner would return in exactly 2 minutes, and when he did, my little charade would be permanently over. He told me I was wasting their valuable time. I did not bother to respond. I merely kept my eyes fixed on the reinforced glass window of the heavy steel door, watching the ambient light of the precinct bullpen filter through the smudged pane. I knew exactly what was happening out there. I could practically count the seconds in my head. Suddenly, the mundane, fluorescent glow of the squad room outside shifted violently. Even through the thick glass, I could see the reflection of every single computer monitor in the entire precinct simultaneously freezing. The standard blue operating systems vanished in a split second, replaced entirely by a blinding, aggressive crimson red, a massive, high-resolution emblem of the United States Department of the Treasury, overlaid with a severe crest of the highest level of federal security, completely locked out every local user. A sharp, digital alarm began blaring from the overhead speakers, signaling a total, unauthorized lockdown of the local police database. The lead detective pushed himself off the wall, his arrogant smirk instantly evaporating. He took one confused step toward the door, muttering under his breath about a system crash. Before his hand could even touch the doorknob, the heavy steel door was violently kicked open. The force was so immense that the door handle punched a visible dent straight into the concrete wall. The local police chief lunged into the suffocating interrogation room. This was a man who usually commanded the room with absolute, intimidating authority. But right now, he looked as though the floor had completely dropped out from beneath his feet. His face was entirely drained of color, pale and slick with a thick layer of terrified sweat. His expensive silk tie was yanked sideways, his collar was unbuttoned, and he was gasping for air as if he had just sprinted for 3 miles. "Step away from the table," the chief roared at the lead detective, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "Get away from her right now." The lead detective froze, completely stunned, raising his hands in confusion. The chief did not even wait for an explanation. He shoved his own subordinate roughly out of the way and practically threw himself toward my chair. His large, calloused hands were trembling so violently that he dropped his heavy metal keyring onto the floor. He cursed loudly, scrambled to pick it up, and desperately fumbled to find the correct tiny key. The 2 investigators watched in absolute, paralyzing horror as their highest-ranking commanding officer practically fell to his knees to personally unlock my handcuffs. The heavy metal mechanisms clicked sharply. The freezing steel jaws finally released my bruised wrists. I slowly pulled my arms forward, calmly rubbing the deep red indentations left on my skin, while the chief stumbled backward, breathing heavily. "Agent Oliver," the chief gasped out, his voice dropping into a desperate, pleading whisper. "I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea. We were completely blind." The district attorney pushed the emergency warrant through without my direct authorization. "We did not know who you really were." The young detective, who had just returned to the doorway, stood frozen in the frame. His jaw was practically on the floor. He stammered, asking what was going on and why the chief was apologizing to a corporate embezzler. The chief spun around, his eyes wide with furious terror. "She is not a corporate embezzler. You absolute fool! That 12-character code you just typed into our database triggered a classified federal override. You just handcuffed a deeply embedded, top-tier undercover operative for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. You just dragged a senior FinCEN agent out of her house in the middle of the night. The silence in the room became incredibly heavy, dense enough to choke on. The two arrogant detectives who had just threatened me with a lifetime in federal prison now looked as though they were about to collapse. I remained seated, maintaining my absolute composure. I looked up at the chief and finally spoke, my voice slicing through their panic with cold precision. When your men confiscated the evidence drives from my husband tonight, you thought you were taking custody of my forged corporate crimes. But you failed to realize that those drives were actually a direct, encrypted bridge. I watched the realization slowly wash over the chief's pale face. By handing those drives directly to law enforcement, Marcus unknowingly delivered his own execution, I explained calmly. The code your detective just entered did not just verify my federal identity, it was the final decryption key. It activated the tracking malware I planted inside the fake evidence. The moment he pressed enter, my program bypassed all of the cartel encryption and dumped the entire, unedited, authentic ledger of their transnational money laundering operations directly into the central servers of the Department of Justice. The brilliant, terrifying reality of the situation completely crushed the men in the room. By trying to frame me, Marcus and Richard had voluntarily walked their entire illegal arms and money laundering empire straight through the front doors of a police station and handed it directly to the federal government. They had provided the very mechanism needed to destroy themselves. The chief dragged a trembling hand down his sweaty face, realizing the catastrophic scale of the conspiracy his department had just been unwittingly dragged into. His precinct had been played as a foolish puppet by a corrupt local prosecutor and a wealthy criminal family. Worse, by arresting me. They had nearly compromised a massive multi-agency national security operation. "The FBI," the chief stammered, looking at me with pure dread. "The system alert said the Federal Bureau of Investigation is taking immediate jurisdiction." "That is correct," I replied, slowly standing up from the metal chair, fully stepping back into my true authority. My federal tactical backup has already been mobilized, and right now, they are paying a very special visit to my husband. I calmly continued to massage the circulation back into my wrists, completely ignoring the stunned, suffocating silence of the two local detectives. "Chief," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick tension of the room, "I suggest you immediately open a secure line and coordinate with the Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical units. They have already formed a perimeter around my former residence, and they are preparing to breach." While the local police scrambled in a sheer panic to contain the massive jurisdictional disaster they had just caused, a completely different scene was unfolding back at the estate. My federal handlers later showed me the raw footage. Marcus had just popped the cork on a bottle of vintage champagne, the expensive liquid spilling over the rim of his crystal glass. He was celebrating his absolute victory. Richard sat deeply in a leather armchair, puffing on a thick imported cigar, completely convinced they had permanently eliminated their only liability. In the center of the grand foyer, Valerie was still holding court on her live stream. The viewership had skyrocketed to nearly 2 million people. She was eagerly reading aloud the endless stream of comments praising her bravery and condemning me to a lifetime behind bars. They were utterly drunk on their own perceived brilliance. Then, the front of the mansion completely exploded. An armored federal tactical vehicle did not just knock on the heavy oak doors, it drove entirely through them, obliterating the grand entryway in a massive shower of splintered wood, shattered glass, and crushing drywall. The deafening roar of the engine was instantly overpowered by the screaming sirens and the blinding strobe of red and blue lights flooding the marble floors. "Federal agents, get down on the ground right now." Scores of heavily armed, tactical operatives in full ballistic gear swarmed into the mansion like a terrifying, unstoppable tidal wave. Marcus dropped his crystal glass. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, the champagne mixing with the dust of his ruined kingdom. Before he could even formulate a single word of protest, 3 agents tackled him violently to the floor, driving his face directly into the cold, unforgiving marble. Richard tried to stand up, demanding to call his high-priced lawyers, but he was immediately swept off his feet and pinned down roughly beside his son. The lead federal agent stood over them, his voice echoing through the ruined hall, reading off a list of charges that sounded like a death sentence. He loudly declared they were being placed under federal arrest for transnational money laundering, systemic financial terrorism, and running a massive organized criminal syndicate. Valerie began screaming hysterically. It was a piercing, agonizing wail of pure terror. She tried to back away, wildly swinging her arms, but a tactical agent grabbed her wrists and slammed the heavy steel handcuffs shut. In the intense struggle, her smartphone slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers. It clattered onto the floor, spinning wildly before coming to a complete stop. The camera lens was pointed perfectly at the center of the room. The live feed never cut out. Nearly 2 million horrified viewers watched in ultra-high definition as the untouchable, glamorous family was violently dragged out of their own home in handcuffs, crying and screaming like battered, terrified animals. It was the ultimate viral sensation Valerie had always craved, permanently cementing their absolute disgrace into the digital archives of the internet. A few hours later, the heavy doors of the Austin Police Precinct swung open. I walked out into the cool, refreshing morning air. The Texas sunrise was just beginning to paint the horizon in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I took a deep breath, savoring the incredibly sweet taste of absolute freedom. Parked right by the curb was a heavily armored federal transport van. As I walked proudly down the precinct steps, the tinted window of the van slowly rolled down. Inside, sitting in the cramped, metal cage, was Marcus. His expensive silk robe was torn and covered in white dust. His face was stained with tears, his eyes red and swollen with utter despair. He looked completely shattered. I did not stop. I did not say a single word. I simply looked him directly in the eyes, gave him one final, chillingly calm smile, and kept walking perfectly straight into the warm sunlight. 2 years have passed since that spectacular morning. The federal trial was swift and utterly merciless. Faced with the mountain of perfectly preserved internal ledgers I had provided, their expensive lawyers could do absolutely nothing. Marcus and Richard were sentenced to life in a maximum security federal prison without the possibility of parole. Valerie received 15 years for her active role in the massive conspiracy. Today, I am standing on the top floor of a massive, shimmering glass skyscraper in a completely new city. It is the headquarters of the new cybersecurity firm I founded, which I now own completely on my own terms. I take a slow sip of my hot coffee, looking down at the sprawling metropolis below. They really thought they could use my brilliance to build their empire and then throw me away to save themselves. But they learned the hardest lesson of all. A true genius never becomes a victim. We just know exactly how to take the gun our enemies point at us and turn it into the very weapon that destroys them. We shine brightly, and we never, ever break. Thank you so much to every single one of you for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story thrilling and want to help our channel survive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity allows us to pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue bringing you more amazing revenge stories every single week. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next one.